everyone, and welcome to the first E78 Partners M&A Founder Podcast, where we'll put leaders that have recently joined us via acquisition on the hot seat for the next 15 to 20 minutes and ask them to share their story and why they joined E78. We'll hopefully have a little fun along the way and appreciate everyone joining. I'm your host and Chief Development Officer, Jonathan Kern, or JJ. For those that don't know me, I joined E78 in April to head up our internal M&A activities and look forward to sharing more about our M&A strategy over the coming months. Given this is our first podcast and our extremely limited production budget, expect a few hiccups, but in the spirit of continual improvement, I promise we'll get better over time. We just need to close more acquisitions and get more at-bats. With us today is Dan Stankey, founder and CEO of Outliers, LLC. The Outliers team recently joined us on June 1st and is E78's 12th acquisition. Dan, it's a pleasure and honor to have you as my first guest in the Founder Podcast. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, JJ. Appreciate it.
Now, Dan, I realize you're on vacation, so appreciate the time. And I know you've heard this a few times, but I really want to welcome you and the whole Outliers team to E78 and reiterate how excited we are to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, JJ. I will add that this is just a vacation. This is actually Stankapalooza 2023. So I come from a family of 9, and all of my brothers and sisters, we come back together. We're in the Hilton Head every year, or I should say every other year. So the last one was actually in 2021. But anyway, we've got about 32 Stankies running around here. So these are all spouses, kids, grandkids, etc. Yeah, it's quite an event. Hilton Head is never the same after a Stankapalooza.
Wow, yeah, that's impressive. Well, let's get through this so we can get back to you can get back to Stankapalooza.
All right.
So first up, honestly, I don't know how many people read the press release that came out earlier this month. So do you mind, in your own words, telling the audience what Outliers does?
Sure. Yeah. So we are a 100% private equity focused consulting firm, basically. All of the folks that work with us, particularly at the CFO level. So we have a number of former private equity CFOs on the team. We have other people on our staff who also have private equity experience. And the goal here, the idea was to really develop a very much of a niche kind of consulting firm that would help lower middle market portfolio companies owned by private equity or family offices. But family offices has been a very part of our business. It's pretty much strictly private equity focused. We do a lot of interim CFO work, interim controller work, and then we also do what we call transition services, which is helping a non-private equity owned company come into a private equity portfolio. And all of that, that step up or 2 or 3 steps up in accounting sophistication required to do that. We help them do that so that the private equity firm gets good data as fast as they can from their new entrant.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. So now the audience is fully versed in what Outliers does. I'd like to go back in time, if you don't mind. One of the things that I always like to do when I talk to successful executives is get into their background and their career progression. You've had a storied career. If you check out your LinkedIn page, I'd say it's fairly extensive. You started as an auditor, moved into some fairly large enterprises, spent some time in London. You're a Michigan man, and full transparency, that had nothing to do with us coming together commercially. But how did you eventually get into the private equity space?
Yeah, so it's great you mentioned the Michigan connection. So my MBA is from Michigan, and I took a course called Private Equity Financing from Dr. Brophy there. It was kind of the guru of private equity in Michigan, the entire state, not just the university. But anyway, I got the taste of it in this course. And then when an opportunity came later on, I sent out my resume to private equity firms, specifically in the Midwest. So I was looking to stay fairly close to home. At the time, I was in I was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but really focused on, hey, where do we want to go with the next step in my career? I like private equity, love the model. I love the clarity of the goals and the lack of kind of flavor of the month. So, the first half of my career was in large public companies. And what I loved about private equity was just the clarity, around what we're after. So anyway, sent out resumes, got a hit with the Riverside company in Cleveland. They were just starting the microcap fund back in 2005. So I joined up at that point. I think I was the third employee brought in. And my role there was really to help smaller companies come into the microcap fund and sort of hit the ground running very quickly. So we get them transitioned into the private equity portfolio, and all of that sort of rigor and the timeliness and the insight that's required of a private equity owned company, we help bring that to them. So I spent 9 years there, first three fund vintages with the microcap fund. And I went on to become CFO for two other private equity owned companies where we didn't have the Riverside model. So in other words, I had no help from the center of these firms. And it would have been nice, frankly, to have it because there's these surges in demand that come along that can wipe you out. So we do a lot of deals. One company I did 7 deals in the first couple of years. That's a huge sort of drain on your resources. So anyway, the idea for Outliers really came to take that same model that I worked with at Riverside and apply it to other lower middle market PE firms. And the market accepted that and went with it, which is great.
And there's a bit of a gap between you being at Riverside and starting Outliers. Was there a catalyst in there that really led you to start your own firm and then try to build from the ground up?
Yeah, really just the idea that, what I saw at the two firms outside of Riverside was just the lack of resources to be applied to private equity CFOs. Generally across the board, I would always think, hey, it'd be nice if I had that extra resource when things get really busy, and it just wasn't there. So, when it came time to sort of look at what my next step was going to be, I thought, hey, I can do this. This is a viable business model for lower middle market PE. They don't have the resources. So Riverside could go out and hire an entire team of folks internally as employees. Most firms can't do that. They don't have the financial resources to do it. So we filled that gap. So we came into the market to fill that void where there was no help, available, but they all know they need it, right? So what's great about our business is if we don't do it, the transactor ends up doing it, and they don't want to do it. That's not how they make their money. So they want to offload as fast as possible all of this accounting stuff to people like us, and that's where we built our niche.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, so we had gone out to the audience before the podcast. So and we polled the audience. What do you want to know about Outliers? And the number one question that came back was, what's the story behind the name? And did you get into a legal fight with Malcolm Gladwell for the naming rights?
Yeah, so the name goes back really to portfolio management, oddly enough. It's not as sexy as the Malcolm Gladwell book, if you will. So really, it was, I had a chance at Riverside to invest in a bunch of their funds. So it wasn't just a microcap. Riverside was very open about, hey, you can invest in our various funds across the world. And I took full advantage of that. And over time, you begin to realize as you look at different portfolios and how they performed, it was always the outliers, particularly in the microcap fund. You might have 25% of the deals you walk away from, right? You give it back to the bank and you lose on those situations. However, there's another 10%, maybe 15% where you just hit a grand slam. And those good outliers will drive the entire performance of the fund. So if they're big enough, and a lot of them were, especially in the microcap fund, they could offset any kind of losses you were having, multiple times over. So again, it was this idea of the outliers of a portfolio and the good ones in that portfolio. Good ones can have an unlimited gain, where the losers can only lose you 100%. And then, you typically walk away. So it was very much focused on who are we selling to with Outliers? We're selling to the transactors, the deal team in a private equity firm. They would know what we're talking about when we talk about Outliers, because that's what's driving their fund performance. So it was very much targeted at who we're going to sell to, as in this case, the deal teams. So
Yep.
yeah, and Malcolm Gladwell, I love the book actually. I do quote it on the website a few different places. One of which is an interesting one about, is it pure talent or is it planning? Is it sort of getting ready to do things, or is it talent that you have innately to be successful? And what they found over time is it's a lot of it's planning, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, you can become successful, just be better at planning than your competitors. So we focus on that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. So one thing, for our audience, one thing that we focus on when we're looking at acquisition targets is, are they growing? Obviously, E78, we want to continue to grow the organization, create more opportunities for our people. And that was one of the things that attracted us to Outliers. You guys have been very successful over the past couple of years of really driving significant growth. How have you been able to compete against some of the larger players in the space?
Yeah, so we're very much focused on a particular niche, right? So we don't go after anything that's not private equity. And the reason for that, by the way, is because we don't want to devote our resources to something that's not private equity and then have a private equity opportunity come along that we can't fill because we went off and started working with, a family-owned company. That's why we avoided it. We wanted to stay in the private equity world. So again, very niche. When you think about entry strategies, coming into an industry, you would look at becoming a niche player first, right? You come in, you dominate the niche, and then you can build out your offering from there. That's exactly what we did here. We focused, obviously, not only on the niche, but on developing that sort of attitude within the firm that we are all ex-private equity people, and we all consider private equity to be the most difficult environment, particularly with accounting finance, to operate within. So we saw that as kind of, if you can make it in the private equity world, that's probably as best as you can do, frankly, having spent a good chunk of my career in industry, public owned companies, I knew that for a fact. So we approached it niche business, all private equity guys. And then we just went at the business. We hit the accelerator in 2022. Over the 5-year life so far of Outliers, we're at about a 60% CAGR, or compounded annual growth rate. And a lot of that was just because we focused on a niche, we exploited the niche, we developed more services, and we were sort of moving in that direction as we then engaged with E78 again in discussions.
Yeah. And you guys still have been able to grow even, over the last kind of 12, 18 months with some of the economic turmoil, financing market kind of getting a little bit wonky. How do you think the economic environment is going to play into, your business, your particular, spot in the business, and maybe, how that's going to impact E78 kind of going forward?
Yeah, so I think the way we've seen it so far, and we have seen some tough times. There's no question. We have client portfolio companies which are struggling, and what we found is that the FP&A part of the business that we just developed, by the way, in December of 22, has really taken off. And the insight provided by the FP&A function, and that in our case is led by Jay Majeski. Jay's done a great job of quickly going in, bringing in different data feeds and making sense of the data. So that provides insight into, where a company's making money, where they're not making money, where there's opportunities for pricing improvement, where the cost structure is, you name it. It's a lot about how the business actually operates. We always like to say it's telling you what's next, not what happened. So accounting very much is what happened. Yep. Jay's group is very much focused on what's going to happen next. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, because we're so experienced, our partners, I think we probably average at least 25, 30 years of experience. We've seen a lot of situations that aren't working out well, and we can evaluate the accounting function, the CFO, the office of the CFO, et cetera, and sort of suggest improvements in how things operate. So the portfolio company gets sort of better insight, better functional control over the company, because of our experience base and our ability to, having been in a number of situations ourselves, we can help the existing CFO, PE firm to improve.
Yeah, you're sort of building that experience gives you this sort of trusted advisor status where you can sort of look out for opportunities, which, I think that's something that as E78 continues to improve, I think everybody, we can all focus on trying to, become more of that trusted advisor. All right, so a couple last questions for you here. Selling your business is a pretty big decision. Obviously, Outliers has been around for a few years. You sort of built the firm, been adding capabilities, additional, service lines, so to speak. And I know you've been in private equity a while, so you've seen businesses change hands, and you've been talking to E78 in particular longer than I've worked here. What was it about E78 that sort of helped you decide this is the right home for you, and what really excites you about the future, as a combined organization?
Yeah, I think what sort of got me with E78 in the first place. So why do we continue to talk with E78? As you said, I think it started in 2020, maybe even 2019, but we just kept a dialogue going for a number of years. But what really appealed to me was we talked about the business the same way. So it's very much a relationship business, especially in the private equity side. It is completely relationship oriented. And that was what it got also from John Cigna and Deutsch talking about how you build these relationships. And ultimately, you have to perform. Your business development is hinged completely on executing your existing projects. So, and that was my thought too, was that very much focused on, how do we grow a business? You grow it project by project by doing really good work. And that firm, private equity firm, will call you back for the next one. So it becomes much less of a bidding opportunity for them and much more about, hey, I have a trusted advisor. I'm just going to Dan. I'm going to go to Outliers because I know they can do the work. So that was a big thing. So this meeting of the minds, the mind meld that was going on with E78. I'd say the second thing really was, I think you're very strong where we're not. So we're not particularly strong in healthcare. You guys are. E78 was and still is. Same thing on the FP&A side, same side on the system side. You had a lot of complementary strengths, which would help sort of fill in the void for us. And we were very much focused on the middle market, lower middle market, sort of industry agnostic. It was nice to have this additional sort of resource available to us to go out and sell more things for more people, basically.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. And that's very much, the symbiotic nature, seeing, hey, there's, ancillary capabilities that can then create, stickier, longer term relationships with clients. So that's exactly what, the types of firms that we're looking for, to join us. So, all right, last question, and then you're off the hot seat. Any big client opportunities in the pipeline or recent wins that you'd want to highlight for the audience?
Yeah, I think just one that just happened this week, in fact, was one for a firm called Plymouth Growth Partners. They're based in Ann Arbor. That was a sell-side QOE process, which for whatever reason, we started doing a number of these. I think we've done 3 or 4 of them in the last 2 months. This one was headed up by Jay Majeski, who heads up our FP&A group. But Jay very quickly got involved with the company, even ahead of the contract being signed, just to get the data feed set up. And within probably about a week and a half, provided an insight into the business and provided Kroll, who was doing the buy side QOE work, with a very malleable, very dynamic QOE model that they could use to help get a focus on this particular portfolio company. So very cool thing. I was actually checked in with the Plymouth Growth partner on the engagement and said, hey, things going in your mind? Where do we need to improve? And she came back and was extremely positive and complimentary of how we jumped in there and the team got involved immediately, et cetera. So that was pretty cool. And that highlights, I think, this whole idea of the QOE process. We never had the resources of where we could throw a team at QOE. So we tended to stay to smaller QOE work, but with more resources available on short notice. I think that's a huge opportunity. I think FP&A in general is a huge opportunity for us. It used to be kind of an add-on to our existing service offering. It is now as offering it by itself, which I think can stand on its own, certainly at a minimum stand on its own. So I think those 2 things, are great opportunities for us. And then the third one is really just to help, again, lower middle market with a portfolio count of, let's say, 8 companies to maybe 15, somewhere in there, where they really could use a dedicated resource. Could be us on the outside doing that oversight for them, where they don't have to devote transactor time to it. You don't want your transactors worried about audits or trying to run down the general ledger detail. You want them focused on doing deals. And if they are doing that, it is not optimal for the business. So I think that third one could be what I essentially did for Riverside, but export that to other firms.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, we look forward to continuing to build the relationship and build the connective tissue between the Outliers team and the rest of E78. I know you have some folks that are helping on a couple of things already. But that's it for our first E78 Partners M&A Founder podcast. Again, Dan, want to thank you tremendously. I had a lot of fun. We'll let you get back to Stankapalooza down there in South Carolina. Also, special shout out to our production team, all of Scott Raspa and Abby Diamantopoulos for their contributions in pulling this together. And for the audience, please keep a lookout for future content as we continue to grow E78. And I hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks, JJ.